Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. On today's episode, I will be targeting winter steelhead. I will be demonstrating how to target winter steelhead strictly with artificial baits. However, before the episode starts, I need to preface a small subject. So before we begin this episode, I just want to preface this episode with a question that had been coming up regarding bait fishing versus artificial fishing. One of the biggest key concern I get is what if the river you are targeting is bait restricted? Well, artificials are a great way to target these steelhead in general. However, there seems to be a stigma associated with bait fishing, even if a river allows bait fishing. And I just want to debunk this myth before we start this episode, because there is nothing wrong with fishing bait if a river allows bait for fishing for steelhead and salmon in general. But one of the key complaints I seem to have noticed is there's a lot of criticism involving bait fishing, as anglers who bait fish are looked upon as somewhat less of a skilled angler. That's actually not the case. Some of the worst anglers I've met are actually lure anglers, and that's because they're obviously trying to force feed a fish their favorite lure like 365 days of the year. But bait fishing is extremely effective at taking salmon and steelhead in general. However, there are some legitimate questions involving how to fish artificials. So I just want to put this out there that if you're shy about bait fishing, the only person you're hurting is yourself. You're just taking the opportunity of catching a fish away from yourself. However, if you are fishing a bait restricted river, then artificials are a great way to target steelhead effectively. So with that topic out of the way, let's begin today's episode. This afternoon, I will start by targeting this little channel on the edge of an island. I am targeting a slot. I know that there will be fishes running up this slot. One of my favorite ways to target these slots is simply by drifting a bead. I've demonstrated this technique in the past when trout fishing. It is also very effective for taking winter steelhead, especially as they are spawning. These steelhead will bite beads out of curiosity. The biggest difference between a steelhead taking a bead versus flossing a steelhead is the length of the leader. I find that if a steelhead truly were to bite, it wouldn't matter regardless the length of the leader. What I have rigged is a very basic bottom bouncing rig, but instead of using a lead sinker to tick along the bottom, I like to use these little plastic balls called bouncing betties. I will demonstrate how to tie this rig at the end of this episode, but for now, right into the fishing, I ended up hooking into a nice steelhead. More times than not, when a steelhead takes a bead when it is bouncing along the bottom, the drift or the bouncing will stop completely, and that is when you should set the hook. The best way I can describe it is it is very similar to an American shad bite. The line will just tighten out, and that is when the angler should set the hook. This is a very nice steelhead for my local river. This is my home river I'm fishing on, so I know exactly what these fishes are doing this time of year. So here's the steelhead, and I'm going to show you guys where I've hooked this fish. If a steelhead were to take the bead, it will be on the inside of the jawline, not on the outside. Flossing the fish will have the hook on the outside of the jawline, whereas if the fish were to take the bead, it will be on the inside of the jawline. This is a gorgeous steelhead. I'll show him to you guys real quick, and I'll get him revived and back into the water. Thanks for playing, buddy. Rest up a bit, and off you go. Now I'm going to demonstrate how to take a steelhead on a spinner. I'm fishing a structure area currently right now where bouncing the bottom is not conducive. My preference is to fish with casting gear whenever I'm targeting winter steelhead, because I find that I have much better line control than the spinning rod. Another plus side of using casting gear is I find that I don't get as much fatigue from casting with a casting rod than I do with a spinning rod. Whenever I'm fishing a spinner, I like to attach my spinner to a snap swivel. Some anglers hate the snap swivel and will tie their line directly onto the spinner, but by doing so, I find that the spinner will actually cause an immense amount of line twist, so therefore I like to attach it to a snap swivel. On my home river, the American River, my preference is to fish a spinner with a skinny body style instead of a bullet body style. I don't know why, but I tend to get a lot more bites with the skinny body style, whereas if I were to be fishing the coastal rivers, I would use a bullet style spinner. The goal of using the spinner is to fan cast. My first cast will be as close to the shoreline as possible before fanning out further, and I will reel the spinner as fast as I can. I ended up getting bit because of when spinner fishing. I am not looking for a finesse bite, I am looking for a reaction strike, so therefore speed is key. The goal is to get the spinner as close to the bottom as possible. One mistake I see a lot of anglers do when fishing the spinner is more times than not, most anglers are using a spinner that is too small and can't get close enough to the bottom, so therefore they'll slow down their speed. I find that if I were to use a spinner appropriate to the size of the flow, I'm able to get down and still maintain a very fast speed. I'm trying to burn the spinner very similar to how a bass angler would burn a spinner bait. This will cause the steelhead to react in a very violent manner. More times than not, if a steelhead is in the area and willing to strike a spinner, no spinner will outrun these steelheads. This is another very nice little steelhead. He's not big by any metric or standard, but nonetheless, he is a very pretty native to my local river. On my home river, these little steelhead are pretty abundant. These are often the most aggressive ones and can be caught with spinner and spoons quite frequently. I'll show him to you guys real quick before returning him to the water. This is a very gorgeous winter steelhead. Full fin and not a scale out of place. Rest up a bit and off you go, buddy. Thanks for playing today. Now, as for the artificial bead that I prefer to use, I like these soft beads by BNR. I prefer to go big, while as some anglers like to use smaller beads to try and match the hatch. I like to go big and use a 15mm bead and sometimes even a 20mm bead. I will fish this pegged on a barbless hook, just about 2 inches, and on about roughly a 3.5 feet leader. And the bottom bouncing rig is consisted of nothing but a swivel to a small bead attached to my bouncing Betty. The flows are pretty fast this week, so I'm using a 1/2 ounce Betty to quickly get the bait down to the bottom. And when it gets down to the bottom, all I will do is feel for the bite. Another technique that had become quite popular out here on the West Coast and Pacific Northwest is bobber dogging. It is very similar to this technique, bottom bouncing, which is the oldest and most traditional form of steelhead fishing. All it is adding a bobber on top of this, and thus you get a bobber dogging rig. I don't like using a bobber dogging rig, especially when I'm fishing from the bank, because what will happen is I'll lose too many pieces of equipment if I were to get snagged up. So therefore, my preference is just to bottom bounce. I ended up getting bit right away, and I knew that this was a nice steelhead. Hopefully today's episode helped those anglers that are restricted to those bait restriction rivers. You can actually take steelhead quite successfully on artificial baits, as I've shown today, that with a spinner or even artificial beads, such as soft beads or hard beads, an angler can have quite some success. Yes, I'm looking at you, Big Chico Creek. Those bait restricted rivers aren't a preference of mine in the first place anyways. I know some guys have no other options besides those kind of watershed, but in my opinion, those kind of bait restricted rivers have poor returns of fishes in general. The sun is setting fast, so I will try and land this fish to show you guys before packing up and calling it a day. Hopefully today's episode demonstrates that an angler can have quite a bit of success. I typically don't like fishing purely artificial and will always carry with me bait whenever possible. But for today's demonstration purpose, and for those anglers wanting to see me fish strictly artificial, I have demonstrated today that an angler can indeed take these fishes quite successfully on artificial baits. It is not my preferred way to fish, but if a river or watershed states that there is no bait usage allowed, I don't mind. I will actually fish with artificials. So hopefully today's episode clarifies the topic on catching fish on all strictly artificial. I didn't get as many hookup as I would typically if I were to be fishing roe, but that's okay. This is my home river, bait is allowed, and for today's demonstration purposes, I don't mind hooking to a few fishes for the camera today. This is a much darker fish. This fish probably had been in the system very early in the season, probably during the river closure. Somehow this fish managed to tangle itself around the line. I will untangle this hen because while she was flopping around on the bank, somehow she managed to tangle herself on the leader. This is a very dark fish, possibly spawning, so I will try and get her back into the water as fast as I can. The hook is on the other side of this fish's jaw, so once I untangled it with a barbless hook, the hook just pops right out. This is a very dark fish, but I will show it to you guys real quick. Nonetheless, it is very pretty and still from my local river. I am not retaining any fishes today. This is a hatchery, but I will let her rest and let her go do her thing. Overall, it was just a great day on my local river. I fished a few beats and then ended up hooking into a few fishes with artificials. I didn't hook as many as I would like, but it was still a great day. Thank you guys for watching, and until next time, tight lines y'all.